often when we are over functioning, that is developed from a place of safety, from a place of feeling like, again, that's how we prove our worth. So the biggest thing that somebody can poke at is you're not doing that. You're not pulling your weight. You're not responsible. You're not whatever it may be, whatever flavor that looks like for us. So I noticed that when I receive something that can be like a very minor criticism, that over functioning wound typically feels that in like a really big way. So this is another thing that can show up in relationships is like we're both not really like hearing what's being said. We're like putting a filter over it and hearing it the way that like it hits kind of or triggers our wounds. When you reflect on like conversations and dynamics, you probably have a tendency to feel very criticized when someone else might just be making a statement.
I'm Rachel Green, divorce mediator and collaborative attorney. Join me as I chat about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, we have a real treat today. Nicole Guena is an intuitive human design guide with a focus on women who overfunction in their relationships and lives. Nicole helps women break the pattern of feeling they have to hold everything together while guiding them to recognize their natural wiring so as to live a life with greater ease, clarity, and trust in their own decisions. Welcome, Nicole. Thanks for coming on. Keep the kids in mind.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
So just to begin, why don't you tell our audience some bits about what you do and your journey getting to this work and what drew you to this work?
Yes. So it's a bit of a windy path, but the system that I really use to understand when we say how people are naturally wired is a system called human design. And I came to discover it a few years ago when I was going through some emotionally volatile times, like having some issues in relationships and just feeling like I wanted to understand the roots of like why certain dynamics were so complicated or tense, or I couldn't seem to like see eye to eye with certain people in my life. And human design really provides a framework for understanding who you authentically are and how you operate, and then also understanding other people. So it really helped me to develop a lot of compassion and just kind of see, depersonalize sometimes like what's really happening in dynamics. And it also helped me to really understand myself on a much deeper level than I ever had before. So it really brought me deeper into my personal development and evolution. And I started sharing human design with my coaching clients. And after a couple of years of that, I was realizing that human design is a system that really tells us like who we're authentically meant to be, but we experience a lot of conditioning in our life. So whether that be the conditioning forces of our families or school, media, kind of pulls us away from who we're authentically meant to be. And we start showing up as who we think we're supposed to be to please other people is often what ends up happening. And there are certain beliefs that get kind of like entrenched in childhood and different parts of our lives that keep pulling us back into those old ways of behaving instead of leaning into who we authentically are. I was finding that one of the main things that I saw was this pattern of overfunctioning, which is what you mentioned in my bio. And it's, you know, when women really feel like they need to take on more responsibility than is actually theirs to carry. So really kind of helping to dismantle that so women can change the way that they show up in their life and relationships and actually be supported.
So, you know, the old adage, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. It's interesting how we do tend to gravitate toward the challenges that we've had in our own lives, our personal lives. And then when we overcome them, we want to help other people overcome them as well. I felt like I was single for a long time before I eventually got married, and I had a lot of breakups. And I got to the point where I felt like, oh, you know, there's a good way to break up and a bad way to break up. Like there really is a right and wrong in how to break up. And then I found myself drawn to divorce mediation because I want to help people through their breakups, because to this day, I can still just empathize with the pain of it. Clients tell me their stories and I get tears in my eyes, you know, and it was like a crucial point in my own development. It sounds like you had a similar experience. Do you see that it's more women? Do men not tend to have this problem of feeling overly responsible in their lives for other people?
So I have predominantly worked with women in my practice, like just in general. It's an oversized amount of like my data set, I would say. But definitely what I witness in general is a lot of what creates overfunctioning is things that we experienced in childhood, the way that we're conditioned to show up. And there will be some men that maybe lean into that, but I do feel like it is something that definitely errs more on the side of women because I think we grew up in homes where we witnessed on the home front that typically our mother was the one who was managing everything in the home. They were responsible for what was going on, like logistically in the home, and also like that whole emotional component that sometimes is like floating under the surface that we don't even necessarily realize how much as women we feel emotionally responsible for like the temperature of the room or the environment. Is everyone having fun? Is everyone doing okay? Like it's just so embedded in the way that we operate. And as more time has passed, there's also the whole girl boss culture, overachieving, being the best in school, getting the promotion. So it's just like hitting women from all angles, I think, even more so than ever before. And I do definitely think that it tends to be more women that adopt this belief.
And so, how do you help them?
Yes.
What's the journey
So
of not feeling overly responsible for everybody in the room?
yes. So I'm not going to lie, it's not a brief journey. There's a lot of pieces to it. The way it really worked for me was it started first with understanding my human design, because your human design really gives you this blueprint for who you are authentically meant to be and how you show up. And part of that tool is it helps you to learn how to make decisions. And I think decisions can be one of like the quickest ways that we kind of realize how much we are putting the feelings and the harmony and like everybody else's preferences above how we actually want to make a decision. So lots of times I find in myself and with my clients, the decision making piece of human design is like the first place where they're really confronted with, oh, this is my truth, but it's really hard for me to follow through on it because of the way that it's going to affect other people. And it's scary for me to maybe disappoint or do something that would make people see me in a certain way or see me as lazy or not responsible or all of these things that we think that we're supposed to be.
A tool for understanding your own human design, or how do you
Yes.
pull that out of your psyche, especially if it's not,
So,
if you haven't been living in harmony with who you are authentically meant to be? How do you get to that?
yes. So the fun part about this is that it is like a mystical system. So it's based on your birth information. But it does mean that you don't have to answer a million questions and try to self-assess yourself. You just pop in the information and a chart comes out. I actually shared a link with you that we can put in the show notes because
Oh,
I have an email series that helps walk people through the basics of it.
oh, great.
Even if you're not like into the mystical, you're like, oh, I don't buy into that. I would say definitely experiment with it because though it has mystical origins, it's extremely practical and actionable. So it can really be very validating that the way that you kind of naturally want to show up is the way that you're meant to show up, and it helps you lean into that. So it gives you this like awareness piece, which is really awesome. But then when we go back to like our normal life, I was finding my clients were like, I just can't seem to actually follow through on the things that I like want to do because I have all these balls in the air and all of these people that I need to care for. And if we're really boiling down to it, it is typically somewhat around a self-worth wound, a feeling of what do I bring to the table if I am not the one who's managing all the things, if I'm not the one who's doing for other people. We feel like we need to do because just being isn't quite enough. So we really need to work on what those subconscious beliefs and self-worth are so that you can build that up and not have to be the one that's constantly doing for others to feel like you deserve to be in the room.
So, what are some of the benefits that you've seen people, in their journey of working with you? Like, do they end up, it must upset a lot of relationships in their lives, is what I'm thinking. Like, I mean, of course, I'm also thinking about it from the perspective of people who end up divorcing. And it seems to me like this is the kind of thing that probably would trigger a require, as one person in a relationship changes, the other person has to adjust and change or not. But then that usually will end the relationship. It's almost like an unspoken contract. You're supposed to take care of everything. I mean, I see this with my clients also. I mean, also with friends. when, a couple has a baby, that's one of the trigger points for a relationship ending, just using gender stereotypes, although it could be reversed, and it could also happen with gay couples. One person is more involved in caring for the baby, and the other person feels like, hey, wait a second, you're supposed to be taking care of me. And often it's the woman who's more caring for the baby, and the man who's going, what about me? And feeling abandoned. So that's just one example of how the change in the household work has triggered, the end of relationship, but it must be in other spheres too.
And that, what you're saying, is the reason why we have a fear to change that dynamic, because it's like, well, what if we lose the relationship if we start showing up in a different way? So
And you could lose your
sometimes,
job too. I
yep,
mean, it's relationships at work, in relationships, intimate relationships, friends. It could
100%.
be, yeah. So what happens to your clients? It's
Exactly.
scary.
It is. And that is why, like, this is very deep work, because that is what's underneath it all, whether they're consciously realizing that's what they're feeling or not. So part of it is you have to kind of come to terms with the fact of, do you really want to be in a relationship or in dynamics where you have to please other people or show up and perform in order to be accepted? So
Right. I mean,
that's
because
why.
you're not being true to yourself.
Exactly.
And that's the
And so
problem.
resentful. I mean, that's like the biggest thing that like my clients describe as like their lived experience is it's not a pleasant experience when you're feeling so resentful, and that in and of itself takes a toll on a relationship, because I'm sure you probably see that more often relationships are falling apart because of the resentment, not because the woman's being like, I'm going to take back my power and then the man's, like turned off by it. And
Right,
I
because
think
if the woman was perfectly happy overperforming everywhere, then it's not a problem. But that's
more power
rarely
to you.
that's rarely how she feels, because she feels
Exactly.
put upon.
Yep. And I think the thing that we don't realize is that us over functioning is creating that dynamic, and us having the belief that we need to over function is what also makes the other people in our lives show up the way that they do. It takes two to tango. And I do think that it is scary, because not everybody in your life is going to rise to the occasion of wanting to meet the version of you that is not going to overfunction and carry the weight for everything. But most people who truly love you, while there'll be an adjustment period, it's not like this is like a seamless process. It gives them an opportunity to actually meet you, support you. And like I'll say, in my marriage, it actually ended up being one of the best things for us, because my husband didn't like feeling like I was the one who was doing everything and I didn't trust him. And like, we don't realize that we're also hurting them and kind of making them feel like we don't trust them to kind of rise to the occasion. So it's scary because we don't necessarily know what we're going to get. And that's also why that self trust and that self worth needs to be built up, because we need to feel like we'll be okay no matter what happens.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That, like, flip side of the overachieving is that you're subtly giving a message to the other person that, I don't think you could do this. I don't think you can handle this. That's why I'm jumping in. My kids, as they have entered their 20s, have both. I have two daughters, and they both have said that to me pretty clearly. Actually, they said it when they were like maybe 15, 16 ish, that when I was jumping in to do things, I was giving them the message that I didn't think they were capable of doing it. And I felt like I was like being a loving mother trying to ease their burdens. And instead, they were perceiving it a completely different way. They were perceiving it as like, oh, mom doesn't have confidence in me. And, in a way that was very freeing for me too, because it meant, oh, so that's not my problem. It's no longer on my plate. She wants to take that over. Yes.
Exactly. And the people that love us also want to feel we can like receive from them. Like when they do us like want to do us a favor, we appreciate it. Like this is kind of like, I know I'm talking about like these very lofty things right now, but like the way to kind of flex this in your day-to-day life is like when someone's like, let me help you with that heavy box you're carrying, instead of being like, no, I got it. It's like, okay, yeah. Like when can you actually let somebody help you instead of just defaulting to, I got it, I don't need anybody, like that hyper independence that we tend to take on. And then people in our life feel like they can't help us, like they can't show up and support us the way people that love us naturally would want to.
I relate to that on my own personal experience. Again, I was 34 when I met my husband, And, all those years before I met him, I had been feeling like I have to work on myself to be like more attractive and more appealing to get a boyfriend who would love me. I have to be like more successful and thinner and, whatever it was,
Yep.
make more money, And when I was in therapy working on this all. And when I did start, my relationship with my husband, I think I was in a different place. And I realized that I had to let him love me instead of having that attitude like, oh, what? He's interested in me, must be an idiot. Which I wasn't conscious that I was thinking that and breaking up with boyfriends because I thought they were idiots for liking me. But, with my husband, I was ready finally, and he was the right person. It just all came together. And I realized that I had not been open to letting somebody love me. And instead I was pushing them away. And with him, I just like relaxed and let him love me. And I mean, that's part of the satisfaction in a relationship. So if you're overdoing, you're not letting them have the opportunity to have that accomplishment too, to participate in the work. It's
Exactly. And it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy of they're like, well, if she won't let me and she won't appreciate it, then I'm just not going to do it. And like, that's how it just like you keep ending up in that loop. And you figure probably a lot of people like what you're talking about, like going to therapy, like you were doing a lot of conscious work before you ended up in a relationship. But I think for a lot of people, they end up in that relationship not so consciously. And then all the work kind of presents itself once you're in the relationship. I know that was like the case for me. So it's kind of like the work's going to present itself probably one way or the other. And yeah, it really comes down to being in a relationship is a lot more complicated than I think we think it will be.
it's more complicated than it is in the movies.
Yes, that is for sure.
So do you have any examples you can give us?
Yes. When we are the one that is doing it all, it almost is kind of like a form of armor that we wear where like we're a little bit impenetrable. There's a little bit of a superiority of like, I can't be questioned because I'm doing everything around here. So
Interesting.
that's another reason we have a hard time letting go is because, again, it takes a lot of self worth to not wear that armor anymore. So, for example, in my relationship, we have done a lot of work on me, like not doing everything. Like now he cooks and I'm more primarily clean. Like we're dividing up like responsibilities in a different way. But for him, this feels very different because before it was very lopsided. And for example, there's just like, this is just so every day, but there was a day where the dishes were in the sink for longer because I had a busy work day and wasn't established when I would do them by. I was going to get the dishes done. And he basically snapped at me and was like, God, I'm like, I need to cook dinner. The dishes are still in the sink. Like, do you even do anything anymore? Obviously, he ended up apologizing. And it was like one of those, like, just like triggered moments that happen in relationships. And we have built so much like communication, the ability to like talk things out. But the version of me a couple of years ago that hadn't done the self-worth work and the belief work, A, wouldn't have even let myself get in that position to be like questions like that. It would have just rocked me to have someone be able to say like, what are you doing around here? Like that would have been my worst nightmare a couple of years ago. And I needed to build up so much worth in myself to be able to say to him like, we didn't like calmly say like, I really don't appreciate that you said that to me that way. But we also didn't establish that like I was going to do the dishes by a certain time. And then it was kind of like he was having a bad day at work. Good conversation. He apologized. It all was worked out because I was able to come at the situation from a grounded place of self worth, even though like my guard was down. Like I didn't have a quote unquote leg to stand on that I would have stood on before, being able to be like, how dare you? Which I think we all know as women, that feeling of being able to say to our partners, like, how dare you? And we have to let go of that if we are going to like start making these shifts.
It's like it gives you armor, like the armor of I'm overdoing. Like he can't criticize me at all because I'm doing much more than he is. And it kind of lets you go through your day like self-righteously and feeling like no one can criticize you, no one can attack you.
Often when we are over functioning, that is developed from a place of safety, from a place of feeling like, again, that's how we prove our worth. So like the biggest thing that somebody can poke at is like, you're not doing that. You're not pulling your weight. You're not responsible. You're not, whatever it may be, whatever flavor that looks like for us. So I noticed that when I receive something that can be like a very minor criticism, that over functioning wound typically feels that in like a really big way. So this is another thing that can show up in relationships, is like we're both not really like hearing what's literally being said. We're like putting a filter over it and hearing it the way that like it hits kind of or triggers our wounds. So that's
Yeah.
another thing that can just be so helpful, especially if you're an over functioner. When you reflect on like conversations and dynamics, you probably have a tendency to feel very criticized when someone else like literally might just be making a statement.
Right. I had an experience with some clients where the wife was just making statements about what was going on in the home, or, taking care of their child. And the husband heard everything as an attack and was just super defensive and yelling back at her. And she was just making, kind of calm statements. And I saw this dynamic and I said, it sounds like when she said X, Y, and Z, you heard it as you lazy slug. You did X, Y, and Z. And I said, I wasn't hearing her attack, but I can see that you felt it was an attack. And it was like the whole temperature in the room went, and suddenly the voices were no longer raised. And he explained why he heard it as an attack. And then she had the opportunity to say, oh, that's not how I meant it. That's not what I was thinking, and it was like really useful to make
Absolutely.
explicit those implicit things, but those of us who are, as you said, wearing wound glasses are going to hear everything as sticking, and poking our wounds.
Exactly, especially when you figure in a long-term relationship. Because, sometimes with my husband, he'll be like, I'm just making a statement. And I'm like, I know that tone. Like, we do, like, there's history there. Like, we do maybe like read into those things even more. But then it also, when we are making these changes and we're evolving and we're asking our partner or our boss or, whatever person we're talking about in this dance to evolve with us, is we have to let them evolve. Like if I'm changing, I can't keep holding him to the same thing of like, well, when you would have said that 5 years ago, you would have been implying something. It's like, well, he's not 5 years ago him right now. Like we're both trying to meet each other in a new way in this dynamic. So I think that's the other thing that's is hard, because there's so much history there that we're kind of gets like poked at every time these things come up. But it's kind of reminding ourselves of like, especially if you're in a situation where you're both trying to do the work. But either way, if you want to change a dynamic, even if only one of you is trying to change it, you really have to try to rise to the occasion and see things through as like impartial lenses instead of wound lenses as much as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like you're working with one person in the partnership and that makes the other person change, but then it also means the person, the woman that you're working with, has to also be willing to change in response to the changes of the partner. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's interesting. Yeah, it's complicated work.
It is. It really is. But it's I have to say, for me personally, as someone who was like textbook over functioner a couple of years ago, and where I am right now in my relationships and my work, like my marriage, it's just night and day. And it does have to start with you, even though typically when we're in this over functioning cycle, it feels like there's no room to change it. It feels like you have to show up this way. Your life is forcing you to be this person. But we have to really see that it feels that way because we've now built a life that's reinforcing it. But if it's going to change, it's got to start with us. And when people really love you and support you, like they're actually really happy to see it change.
And also, it makes for a more satisfying and true, intimate connection with your partner because you're really being your true self instead of fulfilling some kind of expectations that are from outside of you, and they aren't really honoring who you are meant to be.
Absolutely. And the other
Yeah.
thing that I find is that when we have this pattern, it's like the underpinning of kind of everything in our lives. It's like whether you're trying to like, build a business or lose weight or get the promotion, it's like, well, how could I possibly? I already have so much going on and I'm drowning in it. It's like this over functioning story just keeps us small in life in general. And it's kind of like once we can dismantle that, it's like everything opens up because
Yeah.
all of a sudden everything is possible because we're not trying to white knuckle everything by ourselves.
Right. It sounds like you're doing fantastic work that really is meaningful and like can change somebody's life in a way that they'll be thinking about you for decades afterwards.
Thank you. I hope so. Yes, I mean it really is. It's been so life-changing for me, and even with the clients that I've worked with starting uncovering these patterns so far, it just really cuts to the core of certain insecurities they hadn't even realized were there, and will take some time to build up worth around, but it's the most important work we can do, in my
But it's
opinion.
so, yeah, it's so meaningful to have the opportunity to like transform somebody's whole experience of life
Yes,
that way.
it
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah. And also like building healthier relationships for people for their futures, and that, will hopefully impact their children, and having a, happier, more contented home, and modeling how to be your authentic self.
Exactly. I mean,
It's
that's,
really
to bring
beautiful.
it back to the podcast, like kids observe. I mean, that's like the biggest way. It's
They
like, it's
observe
what
everything.
we do. So for them to really see this kind of like evolution and worth and communication in a relationship is just really setting up the next generation for.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I've had a number of cases where the where the kids went to one or the other parent and said, you can't keep doing this, when they get to be a little older,
Mhm,
teenagers or in their 20s, and then they turn around and say to the parent, I watched this my whole life and I don't know why you let it keep going on this long.
mhm.
And that also always is very moving too, because these kids grow up in these dysfunctional family relationships, and then they see everything, they remember everything, they see it all, and then it's like a tragedy that the parents didn't figure out how to resolve their problems earlier. So yeah, well, it's been a delight to talk to you, Nicole, and learn about your fascinating work. Do you have any particular takeaways?
Where can you just start flexing the letting people support you muscle? How can you let someone open the door for you or carry something for you or pick up your kid from school? Like just start like building. It's like you're building your like capacity for letting people help you, because what ends up happening is we create these lives where we just would love nothing more than for someone to help us in like this huge way, but then we won't let someone open the door for us. So like there's a real energetic mismatch there. So like how can you just start like building that capacity for letting people show up for you?
That's beautiful. That's such a concrete step that everybody can take.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, it's been really interesting talking to you, and thank you for your work. Be in touch. Keep the kids in mind.
Thank you so much for having me.